Everybody. Welcome to Military Dinner Table Conversations. I'm Jen Barnhill. Give you a little background on these conversations. I use them to help inform the columns that I write for military.com. It's one of many ways that I collect information, and the purpose of it is to hear from family members directly about the topics that are impacting them. They don't have to know like one reporter, they don't have to know how to access a military nonprofit, and so to get their stories told. And so I'm happy that you're here to share your experiences. The format is kind of easy going and go with the flow. We are recording, but we'll talk first with Cathy, who is from Modern Military Association of America. She's going to share a little bit about their organization and why she's here. But that's just a short period of time, and then we're going to launch into poll questions that kind of are geared towards just getting the conversation started about this particular topic, which is marriage equality, and basically how federal protections that are under, the Supreme Court rulings or court rulings impact military families, because it's not necessarily a federal solidified protection that can be, as we've seen with Roe, can be wiped away. So that's why we're here today. I'm really excited to have you all. As I mentioned, as people that come in, we'll just let them in and get started, but I don't want to delay the conversation any further. And so I want to give Cathy the floor just to give her an opportunity to introduce herself to you all.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm excited to meet you. I'm excited to see you, Mary. Mary, I know from our support group, and I feel like you're going to have really great stories to share. So I'm excited to see you guys. So I'm Cathy Marcello. I'm the Deputy Director at Modern Military Association of America. I am an Army brat. My dad served for 32 years. Army spouse. My husband served for 26. And I'm the super proud mom to a transgender kiddo who transitioned like 15 years ago. And that is how I came into Modern Military Association of America to run their Children and Families program and start the advocacy work for LGBTQ plus military youth who have been navigating this patchwork of anti-LGBTQ plus laws. And we thought it was kind of an interesting thought process about what military families are experiencing navigating different state laws without these federal kind of protections for their kids, if their kids are trans or non-binary, and kind of what that would look like if we lost marriage equality, given that Clarence Thomas indicated he was open to a court case about marriage equality and like re-looking at that, which is shocking. It has been a conversation in the communities and the support groups that I work with, a fear that that would be next, and that's on the table. This week, we have been having lots of meetings with Congress about the National Defense Authorization Act, which funds the military, right? There's actually, in both the House and Senate versions, what would essentially be a Hyde Amendment for gender-affirming care. So this would be a ban on funding for gender-affirming care for both service members and dependents. It would be kind of the first federalized gender-affirming care ban. It would be very bad. We're very upset, obviously, that they're experimenting on the military. And if you took that in combination with the anti-LGBTQ laws in all the states the service members live in, it could be really dicey for equality, just like people not having access to reproductive health care, IVF bans. It's really kind of a mess, thinking about how military families that are supposed to be able to live anywhere could have some real limitations. And I invited folks here tonight, and I hope Mary can address it. I thought it would be really interesting to look at that time period between when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, but during the Defense of Marriage Act, right? And so that time period when you could be out, and yet there were still bans on marriage equality, and how did the services handle it? It's my understanding they actually did pretty good. You could get an ID card. They treated people like spouses. They recognized marriages from the states where people were legally married. So perhaps that's a good indicator that if things went to hell, we could hopefully count on no, Mary says no. I feel like that's a good spiel from me to start with. But yeah, I definitely don't want to take the platform from anybody else.
Yeah, and this is a very fluid conversation. I want to hear from everybody about their experiences. I launched a poll question, which I will end and share now, which is not a surprising thing. Everyone is a little concerned about the future of marriage equality, and usually what I start asking folks is, why did they show up tonight? What made you want to join this call? That is where I always start, and I will give fair warning. As a reporter, I'm used to awkward silences. I have no problem waiting for people to speak. There's no pressure to, but I think that it makes for a more robust conversation to hear from everyone. So if anyone's willing to kind of share a little bit about what brings them here tonight, that would be a great way we can kick off the conversation.
I'm happy to go first if nobody else wants to. Although I am a therapist, so I'm also very used to awkward silences, and that's sort of something that I have come to appreciate. Is the power of silence in getting people to consider things more and to think about their answers and then come up with an answer. But apologies if I sound weird. There's like 50 million different colds and flus and COVID and things going around in Alaska, and I seem to have gotten one of them. But I am a Coast Guard spouse. My husband is an officer, and I am also a therapist who works a lot with both people who are in the military or military dependents, and then also with people who are part of the LGBTQ community. So obviously, I have my pronouns there. I'm non-binary, so I care about this from the perspective of it being something that impacts me, and I also care about it from the perspective of it being something that I've seen impacting clients. So I am probably somebody who would be interested in transitioning later on down the line, but I'm also somebody who would be absolutely terrified that changing my gender marker on my ID and going through that whole process with the military and the government would make me a target and make my husband a target if marriage equality were to be repealed and we were to start running into those kind of issues with like the boulder that could very easily start rolling down the hill if that first step is taken with those things. So that's kind of where I'm coming from and why I joined today.
Thanks, Elle. And can I ask you a follow-up question really fast? Is
Yeah.
obviously you mentioned you work with many who are in the same community and you support them. I know we're going to hear from Cathy about the people that she's worked with and are hearing from what they're hearing and they're saying. Is this something that has come up in natural conversation? Is this something that you have dealt with as a part of what working with individuals who might be impacted by this conversation?
Yeah, it definitely is something that comes up. I think even though the generation that I'm part of and the generation that my husband's part of, like he wasn't in the military when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. He and I are both in our mid 20s. So we're post all of that happening. Like by the time we came of age, like gay marriage was legal, all of those things. But I think there's still a lot of fear, like residual fear around that the military used to be this way. And that depending on the administration that comes in and stuff like that, like it could be very possible that we could go backwards. And I think politically, a lot of people are just really afraid of going backwards and what that would look like for them.
Well, thanks, Sal. I appreciate you sharing. I know, Mary, I would love to hear from you. I know that Cathy Kate kind of gave you a little introduction earlier, but giving some context to the history that maybe we all didn't live through. I'd love to hear a little bit about what brings you here today.
Well, I didn't live through either. My wife and I met after she became a veteran. so, but we both know, and she served through Don't Ask, Don't Tell. She was dating somebody at the time, and I know it was very hard for them. But I'm also afraid that I'm 73. I am afraid that our younger same-sex couples may marry someone when they're stationed overseas. And if our marriages get made null and void, where does that leave us? It doesn't leave us with a good feeling at all. And now I'm a widow because she passed away in February this year. So there's all that to deal with for the military. So.
And Mary, you've mentioned that navigating the VA has been difficult as a widow in a gay couple, right?
Yeah, I've applied for my benefits, and last Thursday I got a form to ask me to fill out when we were married, how long we were married, and then if we were living apart, why were we living apart, and have to get lay people to sign this saying that this is true. So tomorrow I'm heading to the VSO and hope the roads are not flooded. But yeah, it is hard. And there's also an age thing about it. Under the DIC, if you remarry under the age of 55, you lose your DIC. But if you remarry after you're 55, that is okay. So there's lots of discrepancies there. Every widow needs to be treated the same. And we still have a lot to deal with on that front.
Thank you, Mary, for sharing. I would love to, continue to hear from you throughout this conversation, even if we're talking about forward looking, but I think it's important to understand the context of your experience. So thank you so much for sharing. I just launched a long answer question, so I know people might be typing, but I do want to understand, as military family members, those who support the military family community, what is the impact of kind of being pulled into the national narrative on your individual lives? I think that we can be representative sometimes, and that can have a very, strong impact. So I'd love to hear if anyone's willing to share. Obviously, I know you're typing, but if anyone's willing to share, and this can come from advocates and allies, as well as those who are maybe directly impacted. Cathy, I see you're off mute. Does that mean you're going to share?
Well, I started to type, and then I was like, you know what? Maybe I will answer later. Is the question you asked the same as the question that's in the box?
It is. Yes. So essentially, how has it being spotlighted or being in the national narrative, being pulled into the national narrative, impacted your life in the military life specifically?
Yeah, it is never fun to be kind of the hot button political issue, right? And to witness people having conversations about your family members like they are this abstract thing. And it's not that you're in fear of losing people who are having those abstract conversations, right? It's not directly impacting them. The fears that we have in my own family of being on the hook for thousands of dollars for medical care. There's already a blanket ban on any surgeries for military dependents. So we're just talking about access to hormones and blockers. We already bear a financial burden for anybody over the age of 18 who is a military dependent and wanted to have any kind of gender affirming surgery. So it's just an extra attack. I would say when I say we, I'm speaking for military families with trans and non-binary youth like myself. we feel targeted unnecessarily. We feel like we are just trying to live lives of supporting the country. Like, we want to live in service. Like, we've dedicated our lives to living in service, and yet it's being made so difficult because we cannot navigate moving around the country anymore.
I want to immediately chime in and echo everything that Cathy just said, because I think that that's something that really touches on, I think, the sort of key issue here, which is like there are already so many things where these rights are being limited, and looking at Roe v. Wade as another one, like the military members who may have access to abortions or to these other things in states that they're living in, and then get stationed somewhere else, and they have no choice but to go to a place that's significantly more hostile to them. And I imagine, especially having kids, I'm not somebody who has kids, but especially having kids, because that's something I've worried about myself with, considering going on hormones, is whether they're going to be available, if I'm going to end up in a place where they're not available. And looking at things like you were saying, the financial burden, Cathy, top surgery, just as one example, often costs about $10,000 out of pocket. I've looked into it, and it's just one of those things that they absolutely, they don't cover it. And I was talking to my husband about it, and he's like, oh, well, are there any situations like if you get diagnosed with like dysphoria by like a medical provider? And it's like, no, there's no situation under which the military will cover gender affirming surgery for a dependent, period. And that's really disheartening. And I think seeing all of those bans that are already in place, it makes it really scary to look at what more they could take away if they decide they want to start doing that.
Can I just jump back in again?
Yes, go for it. Yes, please, Mary.
Cathy reminded me there's one other thing. If they nullify our marriages, that means we do not have the right to be buried or interned with our spouses at a military ceremony. The military graveyards. We're going to do an interment for my wife next year at Arlington, because that's how far out they're waiting. But if I passed away and our marriage was nullified, then I wouldn't be allowed to be with her, where at the moment I am.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in this conversation that, even as are concerning, and that are concerning, and then in the future feels concerning. And we touched on a few, obviously, access to care, and the choices. I would love to hear, maybe, I don't know if Cathy or if anyone else who's maybe more familiar with these policies and what goes into these choices, and is it informed based on the standards of care that other insurance companies provide? I'm not as familiar, so please tell me more. What is the justification, I guess, is my question. What is the justification for some of these policies that we're seeing?
I think misinformation and hysteria is the justification. It is not the standard of care to deny this. The standard of care is that this is life-saving, necessary care accepted by every medical association. In fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics actually just reached out to us at Modern Military, very concerned about the anti-equality riders that were in the NDAA. This would make military healthcare for people honorably serving our country and their families, it would make it below the standard of most states' Medicare and Medicaid. Zell, I feel like you have input as a therapist into the medical question.
Yeah, and I will say, from a therapeutic side, we all, for the most part, I can't speak for all therapists, because there are some therapists operating from more religious models who may not believe the same things that the majority of therapists in the field right now do, but all of the therapists that I have talked to and worked with understand the necessity of gender affirming care as you were saying, Cathy, life-saving healthcare. Like these are surgeries and medications and treatments that people need, and that people getting prevents and decreases the risk of suicide. The risk of suicide in transgender people is already so much higher than the average for people outside of that field or outside of that community. And if those people are unable to access care and unable to access supportive therapy and treatment and all of those things, they're so much more likely to die. And so it really is this thing where we as a community are looking at how can we keep people from killing themselves? How can we keep people safe and help them do the things that they're doing? And the government healthcare, by not providing this, is not helping us in that process.
So welcome. This is what I'd mentioned, Jess, before you jumped on. This is a very fluid conversation. So if there's questions you have, you know, in your role, feel free to ask them or pop them into the chat. This is really just a place for me to learn what's happening in the community, and then be able to use it to inform reporting. So, you know, obviously we have a lot going on. We have healthcare, we have the repeal possibly of you know, precedents, with the precedent being of repealing Roe, you know, kind of something that has happened. It's not a conspiracy theory anymore, and it's real. What is that doing to the community as far as their desire or their, you know, intention to stay on active duty? What are you all hearing in your communities? And yourselves as well.
Navigating the patchwork of anti-LGBTQ laws definitely impacts the retention rate for LGBTQ plus service members. They are making considerations about where they want their families to live, what is going to be an inviting environment for them. Like recently, the Department of Defense determined that quality of life issues were having the largest impact on readiness and retention and recruitment. I think your family, yourself, your kids being treated equally in the school system, on their sports teams, within the community, and not being discriminated against or not kind of actively experiencing hatred within the community, right? Those are quality of life issues. But we don't find that those particular issues are being addressed.
And I think even for people, like I'm somebody that my husband and I have had to have this conversation. We've had this conversation several times, and we're on opposite sides of this conversation. Like it's something that we have to continue revisiting. I am on the side of I would rather keep my sex assigned at birth marker and not go through with a transition and support his career, because it's not something that actively hurts me. I'm not somebody who experiences that much dysphoria day to day. And he wants me to be able to express myself the way I want to and get whatever affirming care I want to. And so he's actually on the side of I would absolutely get out of the military to support you and to avoid us going somewhere like that. And I'm on the side of, hey, no, this is your career. Like you worked really hard to build this. And for right now, I'm okay with it, meaning that I'm a little stuck. And so even for people who it might not necessarily be a direct threat to, or who are able to work around that, because we are in a marriage on paper where I'm a female and he is a male, so we'd be okay, it leads to having to make really, really hard decisions about how you're going to live your life.
Yeah, LGBTQ plus families or families with LGBTQ plus youth are making the exact same calculations as every other military family, right? About what's going to be best for your family. You want to continue to live in service. You want to have your military career, but you must also take care of your family. It's the same calculation every single family's making. And the patchwork of laws make it almost impossible. We did a small internal survey at Modern Military for families with LGBTQ plus youth. 95% of the membership with transgender or non-binary dependents have altered their military careers, including early retirement, because of anti-LGBTQ laws.
I was going to ask Cathy if you guys had done something like that, because I think you have a closer, better access to this population than we do. But I'm really interested in hearing that. We never get enough of a sample size to do much with, so I'd love to hear more about that, and maybe offline. But yeah,
Concur. Our sample size is too small just to have an internal survey.
Yeah.
Does the DoD survey? DoD attempt ever to survey? Because I know there was something has come up in a whole nother conversation that I'm writing a story about foreign-born spouses and how there are no indicators on DoD surveys to indicate, hey, I am a foreign-born spouse, so therefore they can't really collect data. Obviously, I feel like when I've read plenty of the DoD demographic reports, but I don't recall seeing anything related to no, and everyone's shaking their head. So does that mean I'm just slow to catch up? So it's a confirmed they do not ask.
They don't even ask about the race or ethnicity of dependents. They have very little information about dependent families.
Yes.
And they don't even gender markers, like male and female are the gender markers that you can do on any DoD survey. There's no room to be anything else on there. Is another one. I was thinking about whether I've ever seen one that actually allows for other options or even a write-in, and I don't think there has been.
So they obviously do a lot of surveys. They just don't ask these questions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to what end, I guess, is that so conversations that have happened recently, you know what I'm saying? If they ask a question, then they might have to answer or solve that, what they find, or do something to do it. Not to say that they wouldn't, but that's anyway.
I was going to say it's continually bizarre to me that we have this like retention and recruitment crisis, and yet these issues are the issues that it doesn't seem like they're looking at or exploring at all. When I think all of the other branches are also experiencing a recruitment and retention crisis. I know the Coast Guard is, because we talk about it, but we're also a little bit in a different bubble since we're DHS. So there's not information is always communicated. So I don't know that much about what the rest of the armed forces are facing, but I think that there's a armed forces wide recruitment crisis. So it just seems interesting that they're not willing to look into these things.
In my work, we talk a lot about that Gen Z statistic. Is it that 30% of Gen Z identifies as LGBTQ plus? Is that the right number?
I don't recall.
Something high.
That's much higher than previous generations by a lot.
Right. And this is that the target audience is that 18 to whatever range for recruitment, and you're self-selecting out for that community if you're not going to be able to support them, especially if people aren't going to want to be in the states where they have these anti-LGBTQ laws. It's almost half of active duty troops are in states with anti-LGBTQ laws. 5 of the 6 states with the most active duty troops have anti-LGBTQ laws. 4 of those 5 have healthcare bans. So there we go, 28. So almost 30. I like to say the Venn diagram of anti-LGBTQ laws and where our troops are stationed is almost a perfect circle.
So can anyone kind of speak to some, Mary, please feel free to.
I'll just come back with the foreign spouses. I am one. I might not sound like it at times. And I know many wives who married their husbands when they've been stationed in Germany or England or wherever. In fact, our own nephew married his wife in the Philippines when he was stationed over there. So there's many, many foreign spouses. And like everybody said, we're not recognized. Those demographics don't get included.
Yeah. Well, I think that I hope that that changes. I hope that there are questions on the DoD surveys that start asking those types of questions, and obviously the question why we're here today, of course, adding, pronouns would be what. So as far as what it's like, Mary, obviously for your wife when she was serving, what they've lived experience right now, there are moments where things feel heightened, as an ally, not someone who's in the community directly, but it feels heightened to me as an outsider. What is that lived experience like when you're in different regions of the country? Is it what we perceive it to be? Can you speak to any solutions or any communities or ways around that you mentioned before? We work around sometimes, like to keep the career going. What is happening when people are in these locations? Is it they're forced to kind of present? I can present as straight. That someone said that to me in an earlier conversation, an earlier interview. I don't have to say that my wife this or my wife that. I'm a white woman. No one's going to ask me any questions. So what's happening in the community? How are they getting by? Are they getting by?
Mary, do you want to say what it's like in South Carolina right now?
Oh, you're muted.
Mute myself. Yes, I'm in North Carolina, right on the state line. Before I moved down here to be close to friends, I never worried about anything. My car's covered in rainbow stickers, including military rainbow stickers. So I get to look sometime at the car and they see me as an older person, they're wondering. But it is hard to live in a red state when you're surrounded with so much hate and you see the Trump flags flying everywhere, and you know that you've got to watch what you say sometimes. But if people do ask me, I actually had to have my car fixed last week. And I went over and went, "Oh, your husband?" I went, "No, my wife." I will blatantly come out and say it and take the risk. Because to me, we need to spread the love. We're not going to change everything quickly. We need to take it day by day and influence one person at a time. And I think that's how maybe we'll change more. But we still need the laws. We need marriage equality be codified so it doesn't go overturned like Roe versus Wade. We've got to get that back and get it sorted right.
Saw before Mary started sharing, a few other people came off mute, so I just want to give everyone an opportunity to share if they wanted to.
I'll jump in. Just I'm like half a second ahead of you, Cathy. Just like half a second on the mute. I wanted to share something that I not pulled from research, not pulled from individual experience, but just some of the things that I've observed in some spouse Facebook groups. So I'm in a spouse Facebook group, and this was this morning that I saw this come up, and it was a post from somebody who's anonymous who said, "Me and my we're in a same-sex relationship. Me and my partner are going to be moving there. What is it like?" I'm really paraphrasing here. And the response is, what I gathered from that is this a place that's safe for me? Is it welcoming? Is it a place that we can be ourselves? And the first few responses, granted, it had only been up for like a couple of minutes. So the first few responses are, "Well, there aren't really any gay bars." And I'm like, that's not what they are asking in this circumstance. And it's like, you missed that entirely. And that just thought that was a potentially good illustration of some of the difficulty of understanding or navigating where your family is going to move to. And as you're weighing what are the choices that are available to you, how do you find out information about, is this community going to be a good one for me and for my family?
Exactly. It's not just the laws, it's the climate, right? I think we've heard lots of stories about African American families at some of the remote bases, Air Force bases out west, and how awful some of the racism they face there. I think we see a lot of families experiencing with trans and non-binary kids, experiencing lots of um, bullying, lots of being ostracized, being forced to homeschool because the school system is impossible to navigate because of either forced outing or bathroom bans. So they don't really have access to the right bathroom. So they would be outed. There's all these other issues that not necessarily related to the laws, but the climate that can make these lives so people's lives so stressful. And I was gonna drop in the chat. These are from the Trevor Project. Their last study, they had enough military kids that are military young people, that they got some stats that the anxiety, suicidal ideation, and attempts at suicide were significantly higher for military kids. So we know that they are feeling the impacts of the climate they're in.
Well, and it's so interesting with just getting to see places that are so supportive and then places that aren't. So I grew up in Portland, Oregon. I lived in Portland, Oregon up until I married my husband, and then we moved to Alaska. So I have only ever lived in a very large urban, queer, super supportive area. And when I was there, I I would get like they them'd as a default. Like in Portland, if people aren't quite sure or they think you might like they want to be like helpful, they'll they them you by default. They're not gonna assume what your pronouns are. And it's just a really safe place to be. And I was out to all of my husband's coworkers at his unit because even the unit in Portland was a lot of people who were really supportive, a lot of same-sex couples. He had multiple people in his unit who were trans or non-binary who were in the Coast Guard, like active duty. And so then coming to Alaska and kind of seeing, oh, this is a red state. I've never lived in a red state before. I've never had to wonder about whether these things are safe. And I've kind of just had to, luckily, I have a very good support system of friends who still live back in Portland, but kind of just had to like retreat back into myself as, oh, everybody's going to assume I'm a woman. And that is the safest way for me to exist here. And that has to be okay. And I have to be okay with getting she heard, and I have to be okay with the gate guards saying ma'am every time I go on base, because I mean, what else are they going to do? And it's an interesting thing to go from having that to not having it anymore. So I really feel for all of those kids who might have gotten to be somewhere like, say, California, or like up in there's JBLM in Washington, like any of those places that are just closer to big population centers that are a lot more liberal, and get to have that acceptance among their peers for a few years and in their community, and then have to go somewhere else where they don't have that anymore. And being young and still trying to deal with those things as a minor, that would be incredibly destabilizing.
Well, I popped in the chat, and there's a lot of good stuff in the chat, and I will be sharing all of this in the summary that I write. But the reason this conversation even came up was because I was talking with families of color, working with Secure Families Initiative, hearing from them, and there were stories that came up that overlapped with this conversation. I feel like they both deserve their own space because I think they're different issues, but they kind of intersect in the way that we might approach a solution. Maybe not like there's not a solution against like a legal solution against racism, right? But there is, as far as the military's response to it, potentially an overlap. So is there something that you have observed that was a very like successful supportive policy? I know you mentioned earlier, Cathy, that the military did right by families at a certain, different points of transition where they were recognizing marriages. Obviously we want the ideal, we want to codify the protection, but what can the military do practically in the interim? Is there anything we're hearing, working on? What's going on in that space?
I think they're gonna have to, DOD-wide, so applying to all the departments, they're going to have to update their assignments policies to factor in, if a family is facing abject discrimination, of any form, right? Then you're going to have to make an exception where you don't force that family to live there and you don't force them to live apart. And
Do you mean like compassionate reassignment, Cathy?
Yes, but I guess without kind of the waiver process of getting the compassionate reassignment. So like
an expedited process?
Like you wouldn't even have to move there to begin with. If you know that being in that location, your family is going to face abject discrimination, we're not going to send you there.
Okay.
Or if you opt to go there, then maybe we are going to financially support geobatching because your family can't move with you.
I wanted, so I'm super interested in this. I think they're like, I'm really interested in trying to find solutions to this. To Jennifer's point, like it's really hard to legislate people to not discriminate, and that's a really difficult thing. But I do think that there are ways to support military families. And your idea from the support mechanism from the DOD. It's been a long day, you guys. Is a great one. So Cathy, I don't know if you were able to attend last week. We just published a report on this topic, similar to this topic, tangent tied to it, focusing on 3 communities, including Hill Air Force Base out in Utah, and what some of the things that they're doing, that these communities can do to support diverse military families, whether those are families of color or LGBTQ families. Those are the 2 populations that we really worked on. And so I think there are some good ideas in there about how communities can help, because I think the DOD is part of the solution, but most families are living in communities. They're living out off the installation. And so we need solutions from the community level as well to create those welcoming environments. So I think there's solutions from multiple places.
Can we be off the record, Jennifer, for a second?
Yes, let me pause the recording. Hold on one second. I'm like, wait, what am I on right here? Hold on. Where did it go? Why is it not showing up? I'm sorry, guys. My brain is not there.
I'd also like to put a pin in a possible solution for what.
So I will say that EFMP and compassionate reassignments are options. They are not perfect. Jennifer and I were on an EFMP coalition. It is an imperfect system for sure. It needs lots of improvements, but that's medical. That's not going to help kids who are only experiencing bias, who are only experiencing sports bans or bathroom bans. EFMP is not going to solve that. And then great example about compassionate reassignment system not working. We had a family in Oklahoma who their child had transitioned years ago. Everything was fine. And then their state passed a bathroom ban. Well, nobody at the school was knowing that this young person was trans. So if they started using the other bathroom as the school was mandating, they would have been outed in a way that would have been very negative for their life, right? We helped that family connect with the JAG, learn how to do a compassionate reassignment, do that paperwork. They got the compassionate reassignment, but when it went to their branch manager, the branch manager said, I know that I don't have to take any of those state laws into effect. They tried to send them to Texas during the time period when Texas was investigating families for child abuse. They ended up putting the family in North Carolina, and 6 months later, North Carolina passed a gender-affirming care ban. That is why
they were the first ones talking about the bathrooms too. It was North Carolina that started the bathroom conversation. That was the first state that really made it a big news headline thing. Sorry.
And I think that's how the Overton window has shifted. Think about how people reacted about that bathroom ban. Everybody was up in arms. They were like, this is wrong. And suddenly now we're in a position where we've got bathroom bans in 14 states. In effect, proposed in more states, but actually in effect right now in 14 states. And we've got sports bans in half the states.
Well, and it's so interesting, Cathy, because what you're talking about, a lot of it is also about passing. And what you're talking about with that family and that kid is about passing. Where when you're looking at kids and those bathroom bans and all of these other things, there are times where I get like double takes going into the women's bathroom in a suit at an event because they don't have gender neutral bathrooms. And because if I'm wearing a manly suit, I just look kind of like a short dude. And I get double takes because I don't even bother trying with the men's bathroom because I'd rather not anyway. But that there are so many of these people that would be put at risk in the other direction if they say pass as a man but are going into the women's restroom. They're going to get attacked for going into the women's restroom, even though that might be the restroom they legally are being told they need to go into.
Yes.
So it just puts them in such a
100%. Yep. And so, you know, what is the point then, right? If they know that that doesn't work, right? They know that the people can't use the opposite bathroom, right? It doesn't work. People would be like, what are you doing in here? It means you can't effectively live a life, right? If you can't use public restrooms, you cannot live a life. And so it's really to the effect to get trans people out of society. It's actually particularly cruel.
And the fact that they don't have they can't send somebody to somewhere better, like the options they're giving are still bad options. I consider the Coast Guard to be extremely a fortunate branch for us to be in because most of the places the Coast Guard sends people are fairly liberal and they're places that aren't the rest of the military isn't sending people. Like we could go up to New England or we could go to like places that Portland, Oregon. Like there's a Coast Guard unit in Portland, Oregon. But seeing the amount of people who get stuck in like the Midwest or the South and all of those places, like there are things like we will never put Louisiana or Florida on our pick list for anywhere. And I think if they called my husband up and said, hey, we want you to go here anyway, he would say no because we just refuse to go to those places. But for a lot of the branches, it seems like there aren't any good options at all. It's pick the least evil out of these three places that are all going to hurt you.
Yeah, absolutely. My spouse had been a lifelong infantry officer and midway through his career blew it up and rebooted and changed his MOS because all of our options going forward were going to keep us in states with anti-LGBTQ laws, with really negative climates. And we made the choice to change career paths to protect our child. And I think we are representative of a lot of military families doing the exact same thing.
I have a question before, and then obviously I want to give everyone the opportunity to share. We can stay on a little longer if desired, if we didn't get to cover all the different topics. But one question I do have is, like, okay, so we know that the nation has a long way to go. Local communities have a long way to go. What can the military do? What can we as a community do, even if it's not policy community? Like, what can the military community do to help?
I have one thought, but I love to hear what Cathy or Mary's thoughts are. I'm just going to share the one thing is like finding ways to communicate places that are like finding out more information about places, like the message that I mentioned this morning is like, how do we share information about places that are safe or places that are not safe so that people can make decisions about their next duty station or even their career trajectory, to Cathy's point about what sort of career your spouse was going to do.
I think my dream would be if these issues about this particular community were treated as we're treated more holistically, like we are part of the military family, right? And I feel like we get these issues get pushed aside and not treated as kind of the other quality of life issues are treated because it's quote unquote political. Listen, the community didn't make it political. Other people decided it was political. We just want to serve the country and, you know, be able to move about the states and have our families have equal rights.
And I think that part of the reason it's so hard to figure out what the military could do is because conservative values are so baked into the foundation of what the military is and the kind of people who go into the military. So everything that you would want to suggest as a solution as I'm thinking about things, it's like people are going to be up in arms about that. People are going to like look at COVID shots when those came out and the military was saying people need to get their COVID vaccines, and the sheer amount of people who decided that that was worth leaving the military over and who decided they were going to create a giant thing about that during the pandemic. And I feel like with the way that the LGBTQ issues have been politicized, anything that you try to do that's in service of trying to help LGBTQ members, dependents, is going to be as politicized and as vehemently and aggressively opposed as that was, if not more so, because now it is the like hot button issue.
One thing that I wrote a book. This is crazy. And in it, I looked at the woke narrative, like from start to finish, looking at how it has been used, where it's been used, when it's been mentioned, and all of these things. And one of the things that I come back to is in looking at all these mentions, I can't help but look at policies that are just trying to support the people who actually are serving. You know, it's, you know, at the time it was, you know, African Americans or whatever, and it was called something different. It wasn't used, the term woke wasn't used, but it was similar. And so it's same for women. When women were allowed to serve, they were considered unfit. You know, there's all these little narratives that culture is not ready to receive necessarily, but the policies that are in place really reflect more about who the military leaders are trying to support, which is the people who have signed up to serve. It's not, you know, who is signing up to serve? This is the community. And then the leaders are just trying to serve those communities, obviously to various levels of success, not going to pretend like it's perfect. But that was just really interesting because the getting pulled into this narrative and this public, you know, manipulative thing is disruptive for military families at every topic. But before we wrap up, I want to give anyone the opportunity to share on any topic that maybe we didn't get to cover, anything that you think is something that I should look into, Jess or whomever should look into to better understand this topic.
I just wanted to say one thing about what you just said, Jennifer. I think that the thing is when we have to look at it, we're starting further back to an extent because I think we're still trying to argue with people about whether being part of the LGBTQ community is a choice. And when we're looking at people who are African American, when we're looking at people who are women, nobody is arguing that those people chose to be African American or those people chose to be women or that they're mentally ill because they're part of those communities, although the parallels with women being unfit to serve are there. So I think that it's hard because to a point we're arguing that we should be allowed to exist first. And then if we're allowed to exist, can we start fighting for these rights that other people have? So I think we need to get to a point where we're allowed to exist and like seen universally as a legitimate, not something that's chosen community of not mentally ill people, that then we can start looking at getting the rights that these other communities have had to fight for.
No, and I hope that is clear. Like I don't mean to say it's one for one, but yes, thank you for providing that addition.
No, I understand that.
I just want to say regarding your comment in chat, Jennifer, about the Navy tubing on the coast, not always true. My wife was an aviation instructor, mechanical engineer inspector, and got posted to Rancho, Illinois, attached to the Air Force. So they can get stuck in some weird places also.
We were in the middle of Nevada We have too, but the Nevada one was a little surprised. Like, there's no water anywhere. What are we doing here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the Coast Guard has like the Great Lakes, so you can end up like smack dab middle of the country.
Yeah.
Well, I have no additional official questions, but I'm here if anyone wants to stay on. But I thank you all for coming and for sharing and for really helping me learn about, what's going on in the community. I hope to be able to write a summary about this, and within the next month, I usually pitch the different articles that come my way to my editor. Sometimes they go in military.com, sometimes they go on my site. And either way, we're going to hear, I'm going to share what we've talked about today. And I really appreciate you guys taking the time to talk and to be honest and vulnerable. If there's any other individuals you think that I should connect with, please, you have my email. Can reach out. I do want to hear from, a diverse group of individuals, so that I can get a more representative story together. So feel free to reach out anytime. I don't have a particular deadline. So thank you all so much. I'm going to end the recording, but you're welcome to stay on if desired.
Yeah, this was